Something that's more scarce is more valuable. There's a lot of anxiousness, X number of technologies out there. Which one do you use? Micro learning. So there's no one size fits all kind of approach. AI actually is replacing human. How do we move from experimentalization to accountability? Tech is built for process, not behavior.
Hello, and a huge welcome to our podcast on ValueMatrixTV, powered by ValueMatrix AI. This is the go to place for conversations on HR leadership, organizational transformation, and anything people. I'm your host, Vandana Nayar, and today we're spotlighting on a true HR powerhouse. We have with us Joshua, who is an HR director with TATA Digital. Joshua brings frontline insights on scaling high impact teams in digital transformation, from AI driven hiring to leadership in massive conglomerates. We are unpacking it all for you. And Joshua, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey Vandana, thanks. Thanks for the introduction. I look forward to the session.
Thanks, Joshua. Let's talk about what we've been witnessing in the last couple of days. The massive AI moves that we are seeing with Reliance, with the Tata Group partnering with OpenAI, with Adani, with Amazon, with Google, a whole lot of catalyzing that's happening in the AI ecosystem growth. I'd love to know what you think and what are the reactions you're hearing from some of your friends in the HR network, and what's the sentiment? What are the conversations all about?
Well, while I wasn't a part of the summit, but I've been hearing a lot of this, and not just India focused, but a global focus of conversation has always been AI, etc., etc. While there's so much noise around it, I've also kind of heard through the channels and also experiencing this as we go along. There's a lot of excitement, especially after this summit, but there is a big ask for excitement, but with measure. That's one area. I see at the same time, there's a lot of anxiousness. I'm talking about purely anxiousness with the speed and velocity at what it's going by. A large part of this, I think, is also kind of linked, and all these go together, right? There's a third element, I believe, is a lot to do with the governance and the ethical pressures of how one should navigate within this whole ecosystem. And I've also seen it in some forms and shape. From the excitement point of view, while everyone wants to adopt it, I believe a lot of organizations are at different stages, different phases, size, the P&Ls, the leadership is looking at it differently. Some want to adopt it end to end by not having substance, and some want to not do anything about it with the anxiousness which I spoke about. At the same time, want to get into it very, very basic vanilla so they can see and test it if they require to. So there's no one size fits all kind of approach in something like this today. The whole productivity acceleration, I think, is a key critical element that most people are talking about, a lever for redesigning the entire operating model. I think those things are really critical in the way leaders today are thinking about it. And I'm not talking about just HR, I'm talking about leaders across the board, the leadership, the boardrooms. That's, I think, what is on their mind. More, I would say, decision-oriented intelligence in workforce planning from an HR point of view. I think that's where the key change can come across. Now, from an anxiousness point of view, I think the anxiousness really stems only on one major part, from an HR lens especially. The real concern isn't whether AI will change work. I believe how fast. So to give you a small kind of example here, today, are we equipped as HR leaders to drive organizational change, let it be learning and development, cultural changes, at the same speed at that technology being deployed? Today, org change and org cultural changes don't happen overnight. It's a part and parcel of how you kind of intervene at the right points in time based on your company's values, mission statements, the employer value proposition. But if you are purely looking at it from a speed point of view, today the big question mark comes that, okay, we've got X number of technologies out there. Which one do you use? And how fast are we able to even change with that? So by the time you start adopting something within the system, using some part of technology, then there's something else that comes up already. And then that change can get mitigated with time. I think recent research, some of the articles, and again, I can't put an exact number to it, but I believe there's an entire area where the half-life of technical skill drop from 8 years to even 2 years by, I think, 2030, 31. So if you're going to switch and drive technological change so hard and fast, are we going to be able to deliver with the same velocity, right?
Right.
Obviously, the no-brainer comes on the whole governance and ethical pressure piece. It's not just HR, right? It's your compliance, your risk, finance, legal, the entire piece on data integrity and technology. How do we prevent maybe workforce polarization, or how do we reskill ethically? What is the AI, possibly the AI governance model from time to time? So it's become more of how do we move from experimentalization to accountability, measured accountability, rather.
So, Joshua, how can HR leaders help reinvent talent strategy around agility, continuous learning, and human machine collaborations, given that current situation demands that AI and humans partner together and we're not future ready yet?
It's quite a challenging question you ask me, Vandana. It really depends on the maturity of the tools plus the people within the organization, leadership teams, how they want to view the entire piece on tech and AI, as a matter of fact. On reinventing talent strategies, specifically when we spoke about earlier as well, I think the agility, the continuous learning, maybe the integration, I think that part of human element with tech, and where does one start and where does one hand off between those two. I do not see jobs disappearing at scale. Jobs may deconstruct, but probably recombine depending on the industry, the nature of work. I believe that the entire shift from roles to capability. When I mean capability, I'm talking about maybe we stop looking at job descriptions as a fixed job description. When you hire someone, you're trying to kind of build them into your system, with your culture, with multiple other aspects that they bring from outside, you bring from inside. It's a lot of collaboration, learning, multiple things that are much softer of nature. So what can change and that handoff can happen, where is the capability aspect? So using adoption of early technology in different forms and shape to draw to the overall parts of capability. I think that's one large piece of the pie. The other big angle I would say is you start building a lot on skill clusters rather. Skilling is definitely important here because you know how to club skills together where you can have it more fungibly, rather more flowy kind of setup in your system. And skills and capability kind of go hand in hand down the line. Your internal talent marketplaces, I think, are going to become extremely critical. So while there may be areas where some people may not have a role, I don't think it's about having a job or not having a job. I think it's more about what you do as your own skill building with skill clusters, dynamic capability maps that you create, and your entire internal talent pipeline or marketplace that you create. You have to think of it as talent fluidity rather than it being that today my role is going to go away. How do I sustain? It's a responsibility for each and every person to start taking that as a pointing cue that, look, you want to be real, relevant. You need to be moving in this direction so that you can actually have an impact on the softer sides of the business. So why not have the AI cue as a part of the entire journey? I think your second part of the conversation was about learning, and because of the agility, how does one bring this together? Learning is the crux of everything here. But from a functional lens, I know your question was more related to HR as a function from learning. We've seen legacy businesses, we've seen new age businesses, we've seen different ways of how learning has been delivered over years, right? Everyone loves a classroom session. I think those are actually the most profound. It still keeps you grounded. It has your interpersonal connections and a learning experience. The other side is obviously most people use a combination today, and some completely use a digital transformation point. Today, with AI adoption, I think it's obviously pushing a lot more to the latter rather than it being in person because of cost aspects, time, delivery, long gestation periods of delivering learning as a capability. While I still believe that should exist, the question is, again, where is the learning thought process? What is the entire organization doing at this point in time to enable that for people, and how fast that can one adapt? It comes back to the velocity. Maybe your traditional models may not work anymore. Futuristically, micro learning can definitely work. Movement from a course to micro learning, weekly, daily, 15-minute quick snapshot of something would probably resemble faster. And the choice is also yours based on where you want to reach and how you want to build your skill and capability. I said earlier also, I think learning has to cater to the capability development aspect. Simply tie learning to your real business problems. Simply. And also, I believe cost impacts are really high. While we talk about learning costs as programs and designing elements like that, but we also have the entire cost of AI implementation. Only with time will you know where the real cost impact really comes up. If you had to kind of put a kind of metrics to it, we say, okay, person A has learned and spent X amount on programs and courses, and then this is the impact from a cost savings point of view or a sales generation point of view, from an overall add value to the organization from a number standpoint. But I think that can completely shift from a learning point of view. It can shift from maybe a time to skills shift metrics, something like that. Again, I don't know. It's really difficult to kind of pinpoint today. Today we all speak, and this is where I feel the anxiousness really sets in. Some are skeptical, some are very for it, Some are not sure, some don't want to take a stand yet. Decision making on this, I believe, starts as HR leaders. It's also our role, I think, to play is with the leadership teams and our leadership discussions in the board meetings or executive leadership things as well. Is how do you establish that feeling? It's more about a feeling that someone gets of psychological satisfaction or psychological dependency, safety. That safe zone is exactly where I think the game changer really lies. Boards today or leadership teams today may not want to adopt something because of the same reason that an employee feels that, oh, if I do this, am I giving leverage to or losing control? Boards today are saying if we do this and we get it wrong, my neck's on the line. Data breaches, plethora of things that can come out of these conversations. How does one navigate from AI not replacing humans to AI actually is replacing human from overall organizational lens? Shifts should definitely come in, I would say, in terms of pilots. What a pilot could actually help out. And this is not just me saying this. I've known global players, ones who've tried and tested that somewhat like how we create new businesses within organizations, like an edge organization. Why not create edge pilots within that system to adopt and play with a cohort of folks? So they start feeling safe. What is the maturity of safety that one feels? That's when you know beyond a particular time frame that, okay, look, this is something that we could definitely roll out, we can't roll out. Focusing on just the overall human elements of judgment, influence, ethics, and the ambiguity around it, I think that should still be a human task, regardless of what you adopt. But the entire premium can shift to your critical thinking, system thinking, the capability, productivity aspect per person can kind of start changing with that. I actually have a reverse thought here.
You must share it.
And like I said,
We'd love
I
to
don't
hear.
know better at this
Yes.
stage, to be honest. I believe as AI rises, the whole deep human skill becomes scarcer. If you think of economics, something that's more scarce is more valuable. So if you use that economic fundamental, maybe demand and supply, and with the earlier points of it being, how do you adapt? How are you doing things on your own merit as well? Kind of close that bridge. How are you allowing technology to be part of your life, but being valuable enough so that you don't feel that psychological unsafety? Right. The whole skill being scarcer might just make a human's element more valuable.
If leaders were going to perform different roles here on, and if they were to make choices around whether they'd hire from market for a certain requirement they have or whether they would internally look for people, there would be some basic needs or some basic criteria that they would go by. Are the present day AI tools which are available for talent acquisition or for talent management internally, are they already up on the intelligence piece, or is it something that we still have to do?
I think I've seen a large journey of it being very, very hands on to a journey which saves you a lot of time and effort. But also, you need to understand that saving of time and effort is also the viable solution to get actually what you really want. I believe that talent acquisition and management is not about filling roles or having a just a performance cycle done. It's literally about curating capability ecosystem. That's where everything starts tying in. A capable workforce directly has an impact on your top and bottom line. Whether you have the tech to enable or not is a question that only makes you better or not. Now, to identify best trends of talent acquisition, as a matter of fact, I believe today there is enough and more in the market that people can use, adopt in simple forms and shapes to entire ecosystems from hire to retire, the entire life cycle. Today, video interviews managed by AI bots just to stream and to filter. I mean, the resume parsing was just very, very old. And then they know they're spending so much more time on the operational parts of the processes rather than it being the decision-making parts of the processes, influencing parts of the process, which should be, I think, not just an HR person's role, but even the manager who's hiring for that role, or for anyone who's a matter of fact in that process, because that doesn't change for anyone. I've seen organizations today who are struggling, and I think many organizations will struggle with this, right, and grapple with this whole problem. My shift from last couple of years has been more focused on the tech solution and how we can get more productive and use our time wisely to get the right kind of people at the right kind of areas of work. A lot of the conversations of simple communication with the organization and hiring managers and so on and so forth, I think is very critical. So while you have AI and tech on one side, you also have your simple daily communication with managers. Hey, look, this is where we are at. This is what we plan to do. This is what's tying in with our value proposition. I believe talent acquisition is the sales force of end product. You're the brand ambassador of the organization. You're the one who's making that first call. So how are you giving the employee today the experience? Earlier, the shift was, oh, I need this company's job, and today it's, I want to experience it the right way. Also, you're looking at multiple. Vandana, I'm going to give you like a matrixed kind of view on this, right? Because you're also looking at one of the largest demographies today is India. India today is like the highest number in terms of deployable workforce people. In that, we've got so many layers with all the generations, etc. I don't want to make this conversation about the Gen Zs, etc. But if you don't adapt to that way, so that shift is also happening with the demographic to make sure that you're more tech enabled. They don't necessarily want to come and meet. So that push is coming automatically to companies. So there is no option but to start engaging and creating that employee experience. It's no different from us buying a product today. It being what can the company also show me along the way, not just brand or the value proposition, but the experience I'm going through in every way. I think that's your biggest dropout ratio, as we already know within talent acquisition overall, or as hiring, that if poor employee experiences lead to dropout ratios much quicker than otherwise would be, right? Your attrition kind of hits in the first 6 months, if not the first year. I still think that it really, Vandana, depends on where the organization is today, what kind of sectors are they working in, where the main workforce really is in that ecosystem, and you've got to drive technology in those areas very critically. So if you're a heavy duty, I would say, services business, you have to be more, your engagement levels are anyways more non-product based from a services point of view. They're not touch and feel product, such as the ITES kind of spaces and so on and so forth. Product companies, again, are engaging very differently, even though they have no option but to use tech to drive those entire aspects, right? Talent acquisition has grown significantly today. I think shortlisting, scoring, all these things have become just at a drop of a profile or someone applying, including job descriptions, I think are getting changed today because of this. There are tools out there that even do a mapping of the job description with people who are there in that sector, looking at other areas. There's all sorts of tech that can come out of it. The question is how you drive it seamlessly, which can add value to all stakeholders across. It has to be a win-win for both, which is where I think a lot of design gaps come in. Look, there, some of them are just overall challenges, but I think this stems at leadership level primarily and how you adopt it. Best practices, I guess, I believe I've answered most of those parts. One needs to be on those areas. But I think constant communication with leaders when you're hiring or looking at talent management frameworks, when you're looking at high potential talent, how are you engaging with them today? What are you doing with them on a growth point of view or a learning point of view? That doesn't mean you ignore people who are not your high potentials, but what are you doing for their micro learning using technology, the systems that we have today? I think that's all part and parcel of the same game that we play, right? I just call it talent. Shifting to the entire question on what are the gaps, honestly, Vandana, and this is a big one. I've seen all of us struggle in these areas, and I think it's quite a significant gap. There are some companies who are not tech savvy at all at this stage, and there are some who've gone and digitized everything under the sun. And both pose as challenges. Both pose as massive design gaps. As I said, there's no one size fits all anyway. I think one of the earlier problems that we used to have, and which is not being catered, I think, in its best form and shape today, is tech is built for process, not behavior. It was earlier used for tracking, approving, record keeping, your reporting. But today, with entire AI space, it can also push so much into personalizing, nudging, continuous listening, coaching. More and more with all this that goes along is the entire prediction. That's the whole purpose of using such a tool eventually, or that aspect. I think the shift of tech for a process still stays a lot with a lot of people. And today, most people are not looking at it for a behavioral point of view. And that goes back to experience. I think there's a large point, and this is a core HR, nothing to do with the functions really, but there is so much and more today in overall systems and tech. HR as a function itself. You have ATSs, you have LMS, learning management systems, you have your entire engagement tools, performance systems, analytical dashboards. I'm sure I'm missing out a host of other areas. Today, there is a clear, overwhelming feeling. What do I choose? How much time do I have to select? What is the ROI? Because you know better than most would. All leaders would say, okay, how am I going to justify this cost? Business or to finance, the CEO and the executive suite saying, hey, look, this is what we need to get into. Rather than being return on investment, you have to have that conversation of return on impact and investment. And sometimes these are longer gestation periods because when you adopt a technology, you're not just going to shut shop on it 6 months if you don't see productivity. It takes time. Change takes time. And that, I think, that is also another, I would say, challenge that most people would kind of face, right? But again, from an HR fraternity or an HR functional point of view, there is so much of all these systems that I spoke about earlier. Sometimes they don't talk to each other as well. And that disconnect, fragmenting throughout leads to a big gap. So I would say that's a solid gap, and you may not be able to fill that gap all the time. Fair enough. But there are ways that you can, I believe, you can use today's new ways of working and the future of HR and AI, etc., to close those gaps, possibly. Folks that may start using those leveraging points rather than, and it also sticks a lot with, I would say, with business when you're justifying cost, because now the cost and impact of, let's say, a solution that you've created, let's say you've got a HRMS platform, you're not going to change that for 3 years or more. You're signing up for a platform for a long time. But there are gaps. How do you identify those gaps? You've already figured out where the pain points are by having simple conversations and knowing where importance comes out of it. But I think these gaps can also be filled with simple AI tools that are in the market. You need to spend a little more time. And again, how that can bridge that area of the gap. You can still have your human interface there, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a complete break, start in the whole process. There could be some kind of communication flow throughout each and every process that we have. So I think an AI orchestrated layer could benefit from that. So skill discovery could be a gap. Employee curiosity could be one. Active listening, not just listening a pulse survey once a year or twice a year, but active listening. How does one engage on a daily basis on something, saying, hey, this worked well, this didn't work well. You get to know way in advance rather than doing some check maybe 6 months down the line. By then, maybe someone's already disengaged or are facing other problems. They may not want to talk about it. But here, you're also allowing tech to help you. Maybe they don't want to talk to someone and they want to use tech. Maybe they want to talk to someone and not use tech. So that is completely, but that option should be given to an employee rather than HR design. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be designing them. We should, with another eye on employees. So using them as a criteria to say, hey, how does this app work? Or how does work for you as an employee who doesn't have HR subject matter expertise. So I think co-designing with the end user is also important in some forms and shape, not every time. Some areas to bridge this could also be, I think, of course, your standard chatbots within system. Like, we have to also be aware that there are people who don't adopt this and there are people who have adopted this too in the last the end months. Quite a few areas that can be improving workflows or answering simple questions, giving the employee the experience of being able to ask what they want to ask. And again, there are small companies who can do this easier, but there are large companies who have no option but to depend on this. You need to depend on active listening through AI embedded co-pilots or workflows, maybe HR owned systems to employee powered platforms rather, where they can do what they want on the platform to check and ask and listen and say and express and all those things. And finally, for us, I think it's more design around the skill and not really a job title. I still believe India as a country is still slower, or rather not as mature as the other markets are on overall skill development. But I know we're pushing that journey very hard now. A lot of forums talk about it.
So I'm just saying, if we had folks like you as advisories, and we had these folks who were the techies, and if these two came together and partnered, don't you think we'd be able to solve these problems at a much, finer level? And maybe get some business folks also in, of course.
Creating an edge organization is what I spoke about. I think there's a lot of merit in having these kind of setups where you have techno-functional people, futuristic thought processes, sometimes have external people coming in also from time to time to kind of help out. You need to get into a pilot, keep a timeline, see the productivity and move with it. Technology is not going to slow down for you. The longer you take for adaptation, the longer you're going to be stuck in that same place. You're not going to move. So you have to take a step. You have to take risks. You have to take gambles. Obviously, the right people, which I said. If you got 60% of it covered, it really depends on the threshold of the company at that point in time. With constant communication, saying what we're really planning on doing. Will it definitely take some areas of work? It surely will. It already has. People don't speak about it very freely, but it has. That's the best way forward. With the use of certain use cases, I believe you find your hardest pain points within your functions. Talk about one or two and then get that on the road. I think that's a great way to get trust built within the system with leadership teams and seeing how productive you as a function actually are. You'll also start rethinking design.
Wonderful, Joshua. So much to think about, so much to take back with us. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope we cross paths again.
Thanks a ton, Vandana. I think there's a lot for us to learn while we all talk about this in the gray zone. There's a lot of positivity around the space. I know that more than it being looked at it differently. It just takes a lot of people to agree to move in those directions collectively. That helps a lot.